What was your final FU to a boss you didn't like? I was a program director developing and piloting a new program, and after a year of being overloaded and telling our exec director I either needed a second person or a smaller caseload, he pulls me into his office and goes, "We don't really think you're a good fit for this position, but you're a bright young lady and we'd hate to lose you. I'm giving you the option to stay and be my secretary. You have until 7 a.m. tomorrow to decide." I took an early lunch, walked to my other job, asked if I could take on more hours, walked back and told him I had found other employment and would have my stuff cleared out by noon. He asked if I could stay 2 more weeks to train a new person, and I told him no. "What if we paid you a consultation fee?" "No, but you're the only person in the county certified." Should have thought of that earlier. Bonus, this was in the middle of an audit where it was discovered that he owed me about $3,000 from unpaid hours. I like to call it my leaving bonus. Story 2. Applied for a full-time job at a daycare. Interview was on Friday, and the director said she would text me over the weekend to tell me my hours for next week. Yay, I got the job. Monday rolls around and no text or email from her, so I'm sitting in my PJs at home thinking I'm out of work. At 10 a.m., a random number calls me and she asked me to come in for 11. I let it slide thinking she lost track of time or whatever. By the end of the day, I asked for my schedule and she said she'll contact me tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. The next day is the same thing, except this time she calls at 11 a.m. asking to come in for 11:15. I waited 2 hours for her call. Now I have no car and live 15 minutes away. On top of this, the shifts were only 4-ish hours long, so the job isn't even full-time. I tell her I need a schedule by the end of the day. Didn't get one. The next day she calls at a random time, but too late. I'm busy at an interview with a different job. I tell her I'll stop in to get my check by the end of the week because she can't respect my time and lied on the ad about being full-time. Also, I'm not getting paid to be on call. I'm glad that you only gave this woman 3 shots. I was going to say, I really hope that you didn't sit here and put up with that for weeks or months at a time. Good for you for getting out before it really got sketchy. Story 4. I worked retail in a clothing store. It was during college. Obviously, it paid minimum wage. At the time, that was less than $6 an hour. It was a basic job. Stock the merchandise, straighten the shelves and racks, run the register. Pretty much the entire staff, including store managers, were around college age. They didn't break our balls, and we did what we were assigned to do. The problem was Derek. Derek was the district manager, and he was exactly the kind of district manager you dread. He shows up and just starts tearing into everything and everyone. Our store managers are now being put through the ringer, which means it's passed on to us. He would yell at me because I didn't greet every single customer who walked in, and didn't give the full spiel of, "Welcome to the store today. We're having a sale on cargo pants and button-up shirts. They're in the rear of the store. Please let me know if I can help you with anything." He also yelled that my SPT, sales per transaction, were too low, that I needed to upsell more. He snidely told me, quote, "I'll show you how it's done," and took the next customer. He bombarded the poor guy, followed him around the store, making suggestions and giving him the hard sell. When the customer left, he left with multiple items, and Derek stood there looking all smug. That's how you do it. Until about 15 minutes later, when the same customer came back and returned everything but one item. When I asked why he was returning them, they made us, he said, quote, "I really just wanted the shirt. F you, Derek. I swear, retail management largely has no effing clue. Minimum wage gets you minimum effort. If I show up on time, don't call out sick unnecessarily, and complete my tasks, I've done my job. You don't get anything more out of me without more compensation." I even had one manager, different job, give me crap when I told him I couldn't make the mandatory store meeting because I had a college class. He said I needed to get my priorities in order. My friend, I'm a college kid working part-time for minimum wage at a clothing store in the mall. My priorities are exactly where they should be in this situation. I'm choosing the college course I paid thousands of dollars for over the 2 hours of minimum wage to sit in the store and learn that we're selling hats now. Story 5. I quit. They begged, so I agreed to stay while they hired someone for me to train up. I figured it might be a month or two. The local talent pool was not a deep one. Months pass, no interviewees, and I asked coworkers if they'd seen people being interviewed for my spot, and it turns out no one was being interviewed for it. I don't know what possessed management to disregard the gift I had offered, but long story short, I quit that Friday with no further warning. Sent the email at the end of the day, and I guarantee that ruined several people's weekends, probably right up to to the CIO level since he was the one who convinced me to stay on while they hired a replacement. Scroll forward a year, and they had hired 3 people to try to keep up with the workload I was managing. We're still falling behind with lower quality work, various departments were pissed at management, and the coworkers I knew from the place had been told by management to ask me if I'd come back, if they ran into me in town. A few folks did run into me, obviously, which is how I found all that out. We had a good laugh. Edit. Wow, this blew up. LOL. I've mentioned this story before on Reddit, I think. I should farm it for karma every few years, but seriously, F that company. Headaches going into the office every day, endless stress with no appreciation right up until I told them I was walking. Folks, if you ever have a job and do it well, the only appreciation that matters is your pay. Them giving you endless kudos is just the HR version of likes and prayers and doesn't even show up on your LinkedIn. Story 6. I forgot my name tag at my second or third day at work at a supermarket. The manager, Damien, asked me where the name tag was, and I was honest. I forgot it. He says to me, quote, "How about I forget to pay you?" I wanted to tell him off, but needed the job. It was casual hours, but they started giving me more and more when they saw how efficient I was. I had a few run-ins with the guy over a couple months. He was one of those short guys that had a complex about it. Drove a powerful car, belittled people, and was just a piece of crap. Eventually, I found full-time work, so one day I walked in, resigned on the spot, and walked out. But it was a weekend and he wasn't there. It was right before Christmas. For some reason, that night I get a call from the store asking me to come in to cover a shift the next morning, and I mentioned I had quit. They had no one else to do it and said, "Why not one last shift?" I said no and hung up. About 5 minutes later, I got a call from Damien asking me to do the coverage. I repeated to him that I had quit, and he repeated that he needed the coverage and he'd see me in the morning. I said F you and hung up. He called me back and said that I can't say that and HR will be having a word with me. So I said F off, short ass, and blocked his number. Thankfully, the new job worked out and I never needed that Damien idiot for a reference. Okay, I don't understand why after you quit a job, they have the nerve to ask you, first of all, to come in and work a shift, and then when you say no, they basically try to force you to do it. It's like, bro, I quit. Cold turkey. I don't work here anymore. Why do they think they even have that authority? Delusional. Story 7. My boss's boss hated me. He drove out my previous boss that was one of the best managers I ever worked for. He demoted me, and then when the company laid off everyone else who knew my product, I insisted he restore me to my previous status or I'd quit. He did, and he wasn't happy about it. Eventually, he demoted me again, and I found another job. During my exit interview with HR, I spoke at length about how he'd effed up the department and fired many excellent people who are now working for the competition. A few months later, he was escorted to the door and told never to return. Apparently, the company took a good, long look at him and found he'd been holding his meetings with his subordinate managers in a local bar and would sometimes never return to the office. I don't know whether my discussions with HR had anything to do with their review of his performance, but I'd like to think so. Story 8. I had a crappy fast food job making like $8 an hour in high school, and the new manager that the corporate owner brought in acted as if he was God himself. Nothing was ever good enough. Nobody could meet his standard. He could do no wrong. If you were on his good side, you'd be spared and he'd overlook your laziness. Dude was a low-key perv, letting the young high school girls come in late and leave early in exchange for hugs, and would always give them breaks. My final straw was when he literally stormed at me and called me into his office one day. "Why were you just standing around instead of working?" I was waiting for the fries to finish and it had maybe 30 seconds left on the timer. "You use that time to restock." 30 seconds? Like, yeah, let me just pull a Superman and restock the whole kitchen in 30 seconds. I told him I was going to college in the fall and couldn't work between the hours of 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. I must have told him this like 3 or 4 times. Next week's schedule comes out, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. I was like, "I specifically told you I'd be unavailable during those hours." He gorilla ripped the schedule off the wall and reposted the new one. I went from having a full schedule to 6 to 10 a.m. on Sunday. When the day finally came, I never showed up. I got a call from him at 4 p.m. acting almighty. F that guy. I told him I quit, and he was like, "You cannot use me as a reference." Story 9. I once worked at a gas station/convenience store that would stay pretty busy for a smallish town right off a major highway overnight, and I worked the night shift. The manager who hired me was great, and I enjoyed working for her. Then she left for better things, and suddenly there was this pure F nugget of a manager who was just a bitter, racist old hag. She and I were basically instant enemies. One night, I was 6 minutes late. I was very, very rarely late. And her little F buddy, I guess, called her to tattle on me after I relieved him, and then she called the store and started going off on me. Since I worked alone overnight until 7 a.m., I waited for about an hour after the berating phone call, and for a moment when the store was empty. Then I hit the emergency stop for the pumps, locked the front doors, counted my drawer very slowly and carefully for the camera so they couldn't accuse me of stealing, left a note saying I quit in the drawer, and closed the register back up. Then I got on the store phone and called the district manager and left a voicemail explaining exactly why I quit and the effery the manager was up to. Then I went to the breakers, shut off the outside lights and most of the inside ones to make the place look closed, and I left out the side door which would lock behind me. Got in my car and left. It's likely my quitting this way cost the store about $1,500 to $2,000 in sales that night. Story 10. Oh, I have a great one for this. 2.5 years ago, my company decided to dock my bonus by 50% because of the pandemic. I was the only one in a sales team of 40 that achieved his target. Didn't say a word to anyone, just filled out an exit form on the HRM software and mentioned the reason as, quote, company stole my money while the CEO bought a brand new car. My manager calls me being the a-hole that he thought he was, and I told him, very calmly, Shri, you're just their guard dog. I don't talk to dogs. The CEO calls me, small firm, just 50-odd people, and starts to tell me how his personal life has nothing to do with my docked bonus. Told him he can go ride that car into a canyon for all I care. An hour later, he calls me from another number since I wasn't picking up his calls. On the other end was a coworker in conference telling me how great the CEO was, how he gave him an advance on his payment when he needed it. This was followed by 2 minutes of me and my girlfriend laughing loudly on the call and talking about how this was so pathetic, as if I'm a girl who has broken up with him and he calls with his friend to tell me how he's the best guy ever. It finally ended with the CEO speaking up and revealing that he was also on the call and could hear us, and my last words were, "Oh, that's great. I was worried you wouldn't realize what a female dog you were being." Never dealt with them again. Started my own business, making my monthly salary in about a week. Story 11. Not me, but a former coworker. My coworker, let's call her Noelle, was nearing retirement age. She was kind of crusty even when I first started at the company and consistently commented she couldn't wait to retire and stick it to everyone. Honestly, she was just older and frustrated that she was always pushed to do the things that were deemed as female jobs. Training new hires was one of those things when she just wanted to put her head down and put in her hours and go the heck home. Enter our new boss. Let's call him Raj. He was a friend of one of the bosses and as time went on was a misogynist. Through COVID, he had daily meetings with our department, often interrupted myself and Noelle, while listened intently to the male employees, and would often prove that he wasn't listening by asking questions that had already been covered in what she and I were saying. He twisted words around to the point that I had to CC HR a few times regarding him outright lying to upper management about me. The icing on the cake was the day I came back from bereavement. I had lost a baby late in my pregnancy. His sole focus was for me to train the person he had hired to cover my maternity leave, despite not even going on maternity leave. Still wanted the notes for my accounts as if I were still going to leave in a couple months. When I sat down with him and explained I would do it, I just needed some time and grace because these tasks were difficult emotionally, he turned to the employee that was hired and told him to ask me to do this task because I clearly wasn't listening to him. That new hire quit rather quickly and told me after he left that he had been disgusted by the way that man had treated me. Anyway, on to Noelle. Noelle, during my pregnancy, often commented that maybe the day I went on maternity would be the day she would retire, something she and I would laugh about over coffee and then continue on with our jobs. Obviously, when I lost my baby, she didn't. She picked up the slack and worked her butt off. When I returned, my Raj's boss, who had been lovely during my bereavement, announced he was going to retire in the new year, 2022. Shortly after, Noelle announced she would be retiring just after the Christmas season, 2021. I was sad to hear these two lovely people would be retiring, but happy for them. Enter Noelle's final FU. Christmas passes, her retirement approaches, her last day in HR, and Raj's boss sit down with her for an exit interview, and they ask about her employment with the company. She tells tells him that she would have retired later in 2022 if Raj wasn't employed with the company. He was an a-hole, lazy, didn't understand his job, and treated the women particularly poorly. That was a Thursday. Monday morning, and Noelle is in the office, and Raj isn't. Turns out, they decided that Noelle would be a much better asset in the company for the period of time to transition after Raj's boss retired. She would assist our new boss in getting situated and retire later in 2022. And she did. I'm on maternity leave now. I had gotten pregnant during all this drama and went on to leave after Noelle retired. From what I hear, she's never been happier. Story 12. I got a job with a company in another state and relocated there with the missus. The phone interview went pretty well, and the operations manager told me that there would be regular reviews and pay rises. When I forced the first review and asked about the pay raise, the owner of the company looked at me and said, quote, "What more value will you offer us to justify it?" This was only 2 weeks after I had done 136 hours in 6 days and damn near unalived myself to get a number of different projects together. This was in the first year. I worked there for 4 years and made some great friends, but every single time the topic of pay came up, the owner kept saying he couldn't afford it. Now, the regional city we were in was famous for its drinking culture, and the boss actually paid for a decent Christmas party. So drunken shenanigans were the norm, and every year they had a secret Santa. For those who don't know what this is, everyone draws a name of someone in the company out of a hat, and has to anonymously get them a small gift. The last Christmas party that I attended was coming up. At that point, the hierarchy of the company didn't know that I was already arranging to leave, and I managed to draw the owner's name out of the hat for the secret Santa gift. I racked my brain on what to get, and finally picked out what I thought was the perfect gift. Fast forward to the night of the Christmas party. All my friends in the company know that I'm leaving, but they're keeping quiet for me. Everyone is getting well lubricated, and it's time for me to hand out the gifts from everyone's secret Santas. There's a few silly coffee mugs, a G-string for one of the more manly guys there, and then the owner picks up his gift. He opens it up to discover that it's one of those rubbish grabbers. The expression on his face is one of weird flex, but okay. As the night starts to wrap up, I mention to one of my mates that it's really important that he reads the card. So with everyone still there, he yells out, "Hey boss, the card you got with your gift, what does it say?" The boss pulls out the card and reads it aloud. The perfect gift for those with very short arms and very deep pockets. To this day, I'm not sure if he knows I gave it to him, but everybody else does. Story 13. I worked in a tattoo studio reception when I was about 21. The owner was an absolute jerk, but we all put up with it because there were not many opportunities in our area to work in this field. I would often try to shortchange people, paying in cash and just randomly coming up with tax deductions from it. UK, so PAYE applies. What he didn't know is that I had worked in payroll for 3 years before, working in PAYE, so I knew he was bullcrapping. I had access to petty cash, so I ordered some wage packets and a stamp with the company name and logo. Every week I would write down the figures that he paid us and his tax amounts, stamp it with the company stamp, and take it home. One day, after planning it all out, I stood up to him when he was shouting at everyone, knowing I would get fired on the spot. Before he had the chance, I told him that he could stick his effing job. Man, it felt great. On my way out, I told him that I would be back in 1 week for my P45. His partner tried to bullcrap me, saying I didn't need a P45 because I didn't pay enough tax. It was then that I smiled sweetly, pointed out that I had in fact worked in payroll, that she needed to provide a P45 or I would report them to the tax office. The look on her face was priceless. In the end, I took all of my pay slips along with a letter I had prepared on company-headed paper, which confirmed my employment dates, took them to the tax office, and innocently queried the tax amounts because I thought they might have been incorrect. In the end, with an investigation and my help, they took him for a lot of money. He lost his business and his house, and he ended up living in a caravan. Story 14. I have two that I equally hated and effed off pretty evenly in my opinion. First, my first job at 16 to 17, I was an assistant manager at a popular for yoga mat bread sandwich shop. The manager has me doing her job and mine, making like $13, which was decent pay for the time but not for the workload. I got tired of her leaving everything for me to do every day when the day was much slower and she had time to make 100 smoke breaks and buy drugs while working. She admitted to it and asked if I knew anyone that sold. I spoke up one day and was told, "I don't appreciate your attitude toward me. It's time for you to find a new job." Okay, bet. I was off that night, but on the next, and it was full time, so 5 days a week. I was either opening or closing by myself, and the days I worked were set since no one else had availability to work them. I went to the store to collect my things that first night I was off and never went back, and never answered again, meaning she had to work open to close multiple days for quite a while, and had to work 6 to 7 days since management needed to be there 7 days a week. Second, I was yet again an assistant manager, this time at a store in the mall, and I had an equal assistant manager in charge of less than I was. The store manager was horrendous and an absolute nightmare. I found out about 8 months in that this other assistant was being paid twice my pay to do less work, and that associates were making more or equal to what I was. I asked for a raise and was told I would get one at my year one mark. Okay, cool. My year review comes in and I'm not eligible for any raise at all due to the store not performing. Based on metrics I had no ability to influence, as mine were the only ones exceeding expectations, and the failing ones were the responsibility of the other assistant and the store manager. I stopped working, but I still showed up for my shifts, doing nothing but occupying space in the essentials like counting and closing register at night and delegating to associates. After 3 months, I was sat down and talked to about how I, quote, seemed to have given up, and asked why that was. My response was that I was being paid less than everyone, so I was doing less. The manager couldn't face telling her boss this, so she made something up, and the boss offered me part-time position back at another store for what I was already being paid. I said yes, worked until I found a new job, then sent all the evidence of the manager's incompetence and poor treatment of employees, I recorded screaming matches she had, to the highest manager I could contact. The manager of the store was fired before my 2 weeks at the new store were up. Her boss was put on probation and made to offer me the manager's job. To which I simply replied, too little, too late, and never spoke to them again. Story 15. Once upon a time, I was working in nonprofit legal services. I wasn't making a lot of money, but I was happy with where I was professionally at the time. Then in walks a new director in another department I was interested in working in. This was an event/program heavy organization, so I reached out to her and asked her if there was anything I could do to help her department, because the previous support staff, a manager and a coordinator, left right before she started and she was rebuilding the department alone. Long story short, she poaches me to interview for her department. She offers me a job. I accept, and from the first day, we just did not work well together. She did not like me, I didn't like her. It didn't last very long, but she started making moves to fire me, having BS meetings about my performance, but was never able to articulate any area I was underperforming in. She did say some BS about me leaving at 5, but this was a 9 to 5 job. So finally, she said she's having a meeting with me and reporting to HR afterwards. I scheduled another job interview instead, called out, got the new job, and gave notice to this psycho. She said I wasn't allowed to work my 2 weeks, had my computer and building access turned off, and sent me on my way. Cut to 4 months later, my former manager in the department I was originally in at this organization hits me up and asks if I want to come back to the job I left for this psycho. I jumped at the chance because this is my actual career/field, and the job I got in the interim was just to make rent. So I got to go back, and my ex-psycho boss was pissed and said I wasn't allowed to attend any of her events/programs. Fat chance, lady. Like I'd ever try. It's been years at this point, and she's still miserable and now unemployed because she's a terrible person to work with. Story 16. So I planned my final FU like 2 weeks in advance. I was a leasing agent for a building with 140 units. The day I joined, we were at 82% occupancy. Me and another new leasing agent were able to reach 96% occupancy within 2 months after a ton of hard work. I thought I was doing so good, I got myself an apartment in the building. Long story short, I was too aggressive and they didn't like my style as I wasn't building rapport with the tenants. They moved me to another building for training and started making my life miserable by giving me tasks not related to my job at all. My manager got demoted and he was moving to another building. His going away party was on a Friday. 2 weeks before the party, I started booking all the appointments on that Friday. Friday comes and I don't show up. No call, no text, nothing. I get a call from the manager asking me where I am. I said, I'm home. He asked me if I'm okay, and I said, yep. And he said, are you coming in? I said, nope. He was silent for about a minute until he picked up on what's going on. Now the fun part. My window was facing the office. I just sat there and watched them trying to keep up with all the appointments I booked and double booked throughout the day. Needless to say, there was a lot of angry clients. He didn't get to enjoy the party as he had to do the showings himself, but he sucked at it, so I knew it was a day from hell for him and the assistant manager. I didn't give a flying F. Story 17. I had a boss when I worked retail who was going through a divorce and losing his frickin' mind. I was hired to be a manager, but on the day when I started work, he informed me that I would not be a manager until I'd completed a probationary period, which I never completed. There was always some issue or some excuse, and meanwhile, he was scheduling me illegally to work alone for long periods of time with no breaks. And when he was in the store, he was often locked in the storeroom, obviously crying. I also was earning $5 an hour less than I agreed to, yet the other employees referred to me as the assistant manager and I handled managerial duties relative to them. It was a sad situation, but obviously a bad employment situation. So I started asking when I was going to be promoted and why I was being scheduled illegally and so on. And one evening, I got a call from the mall where the store was located. The mall had an agreement with the store to be open certain hours and the store wasn't open at that very moment. Apparently, I was listed as its manager on their paperwork and responsible for that. My manager's phone numbers did not work, so we continued like that for a few more weeks. But then I misplaced my key at home one day, and my manager seemed cool, but I had to sign an acknowledgement that I had shown up without my keys. A week or so after that, I was ranting about the situation with another employee, and she stopped me and told me that my manager was going to fire me the next day for losing my keys, which was one of those days when he'd scheduled me to work all day by myself, illegally. He was going to leave me to finish that shift and then sack me. On a Saturday, no less, so it was going to be a hard shift on top of being an illegal one. So, Saturday morning, I came in like usual, but instead of opening, I cleaned out my locker and set up the computers like normal, then threw my key into the store through the roll-down overhead grate and went home, knowing that the mail wouldn't have any way to reach anyone when the store didn't open. I then went to a very boozy lunch at a Mexican restaurant with my best girls. I put my cell phone in the middle of the table, and every time the phone rang with a call from the mail, we'd take a shot. Several weeks later, I got a call from the area manager, who wanted to know why I'd left and would I consider coming back since they had sacked my manager due to his malfeasance, which has left the store with no assistant manager and a bunch of fines for failing to open one of the highest traffic days of the week. I declined. I already had another, better job by then. Okay, so I'd like to give out 2 gold stars here. 1 for seeing the writing on the wall and basically setting them up to fail on your way out, knowing that they planned on doing you dirty on the way out. And 2, sticking to your guns and when they tried to invite you back, saying, nah, I'm good. And, not even with the manager gone, not walking back into that cesspool of negativity. Good job. Story 18. I used to work at a fast food restaurant with a good general manager and a good crew, but corporate decided we weren't making enough money, despite having a BS location and BS upper management. So they moved out my manager and demoted them, and moved in the only person who's ever earned the nickname Thunder Tard. This female dog was a real piece of work. The day she started, 3/4 of the crew quit, and when the remaining crew or the new hires began falling behind or giving her any trouble, she would take them into the office and literally scream at them. She had installed a speaker above the office door that blared the same crappy music she had chosen for the lobby, so loud we couldn't hear what she was saying in the office. And that idiot hated me, for some reason. I got under her skin faster than anyone else, probably because I did my job and took no crap. And the took no crap part is what pissed her off, because she felt like she could just tell anyone what to do at any time, any kind of way. And that didn't go well with me. But she decided one day to demote me from shift manager, and revoke my access without telling me or warning me. So that night I quit, and grabbed the speaker above her office door and ripped it off the wall, wires and all, and left it on her desk. Hated that female dog. Story 20. Late to the party, so this might get buried, but when I quit, the last thing I did was log in from the office computer and send a list of my manager's antics to the district manager, who was her bestie, so really just included to burn her as well. The regional manager, the president of the company, and the CEO. Highlights include 1. Violating labor laws, trying to force 2 elderly employees to quit because she didn't like them. 2. Putting every bad job off onto the 2 hourly paid managers, me, including quarterly financial reports she was required to do by company policy. 3. Changing clock in and out times to avoid paying overtime. Also, requiring people to be there half an hour early to set up, but not letting them clock in early. 4. blocked me from getting promotions 3 times over the course of 2 years because she didn't want to replace me and I was a good little worker. These were salaried and benefited positions, and the district manager essentially let her do the hiring and training for them. She knew I was the best qualified. Hell, I ran her store for her. Pure avarice. There was honestly a lot more. She got away with stuff for years because she was personal friends with the district manager, so I dropped a nice turd on her desk and quit without notice. F 'em. It took her 6 months to get a replacement for me. Turns out she has a reputation, and no one wanted to accept a transfer to her store, not even for a pay raise. Story 21. Honestly, I just undid all his work. I was a lowly help desk tech and reported to the server admin. Previously, we had been under the same manager, but in a bid for more money. He'd threatened to quit unless he got a promotion, so they'd given him managerial powers over me and another coworker. The arrangement was he managed our work, but final hiring/firing was in the hands of our former manager. Having him for a manager was fine for a while, as I was trying to develop my own skills to grow into a new role. Then he started getting really controlling and unbelievably jerkish. I lost access to looking at any system above just a basic computer. Then, when he screwed over a department by ignoring a request for months and I just took care of it, it was part of my normal work, he just sat on the ticket. He blew up, full on screaming in my face while blocking my exit from my cubicle. When the other guy told him he needed to cool it, he just flipped it as if I was being a problem. Next morning, I was in HR with him and my previous boss, defending myself as I tried to explain his behavior, but he was called for firing me because I did such a terrible job, and my old boss said I would just be on probation. My terrible job included being employee of the quarter the previous quarter for the company, in a role that never was considered for it. Hospital IT. Typically, the EOQ was a nurse. So I was put on probation and required to daily detail every single thing I planned to do that day, and review every single thing I actually did that day, to the guy who wanted me fired and screamed in my face. Around the same time, our department was being evaluated for issues on multiple projects, so they brought in a consultant to see what was wrong. Consultant identified that leadership, aka the previous boss, let a few team resources, such as the server admin, be combative and derail projects. She was let go. Then the consultant discovered I was on probation and sent a what the F to HR, as their findings were that me and the coworker who'd stepped in were the only team members the rest of the company thought were actually helpful. Off probation. My manager saw the writing on the wall and found a new job. On his way out, he sang my praises, saying how he thought I should get the job now that he was leaving, despite months before saying I was worthless. I applied, did not get the job, but was offered a new job that was the technical part of his job without the management part. They hired me and a senior team member to manage, who immediately started to defer on me on everything as I had a solid handle on all the systems. I then basically dismantled everything my old boss had done because I'm pretty sure he stopped letting me touch things when he'd realized I'd noticed the crap job he'd done of things. Stuff like using public IP ranges for internal systems, including our main medical system, leaving wide open holes in our firewalls, plain text password files, and directories that were easily accessible. So what did I do as revenge on an old boss I hated? Ripped his entire setup apart and did a far better job than he could possibly do. Story 22. I worked building maintenance at a small daycare center for 5 years. I was in charge of all janitorial work, logistics, and preventative maintenance for the entire property. The supervisor who hired me was amazing, but she moved on to another company after 2 years. The lady they brought in to replace her was a mega female dog who also thought she was smarter than everyone. She'd always tell me she'd have to go to another center to help out, when I knew damn well she was going shopping at the mall. I'd never say anything though, because I was happy she'd be out of the building. She then started criticizing my work, saying I wasn't doing enough and that I was lazy. I asked how she was able to know that, seeing as she was never in the building. Was I slacking off? Absolutely. However, I'd get all my work done first before I'd slack off. My beef was that I had a supervisor who literally did nothing to try to tell me I was doing nothing. At one point, she even tried to make a schedule for me while not knowing anything about my job. This back and forth went on for a couple years until she eventually received a promotion and would be breaking the sunshine list, which she went around and told every single worker about personally, like we cared. She even put up a note on the front door about it. That's when crap hit the fan. She comes into the building the next day with 2 large gas jugs, 25 liters each. First off, that's a fire code violation, which I promptly told her. She then asked me to say they were for the center. With a lawnmower being the only thing I had which needed gas, I said no. She literally started to beg me to lie for her, and that's when I put the pieces together. I told her I wouldn't be telling any lies unless she told me what was going on. She finally admitted to claiming more gas mileage than she was actually accumulating, and that the gas jugs were a cover-up. Now knowing the truth, I smiled and said I still wouldn't be lying for her. The next day, our regional director and company treasurer came into the building and requested an interview with me. I played dumb throughout the whole meeting, acting like I had no idea why they wanted to speak with me. They asked a few questions first and slowly tiptoed towards the gas jugs. They directly asked me what the two large gas jugs were for. I explained to them that I never purchased two large gas jugs and that I had one small one that I'd fill up every spring before filing the paperwork to get reimbursed. This was all 100% true, which the paperwork later proved. They then tell me that my supervisor told them that I had bought 50 liters of gas. I told them she was lying and that I'd never do something that stupid, seeing as I only had a lawnmower which needed gas. They believed me. She was fired the next day. Turns out the gas was just a small piece to the massive amount of theft she was committing. I later found out that she had been using the company credit card on all her shopping trips. Now, was she getting away with it all? Not sure, but she had literally spent thousands of dollars until she got caught. Once I learned about her being fired, I texted her a simple message saying, "Sorry to have you stolen away from us." Story 23. My boss had been riding my ass so hard about what I was doing, marketing, which she knew nothing about, that my doctor told me if I kept up the level of stress I was under, I'd end up having a cardiac event. I was 26. The last straw was when she denied my time off request for Christmas that she had already verbally okayed, told me I already had Christmas Eve and Christmas Day off because they were on a weekend, and I needed to be there on Friday and Monday. So the week before Thanksgiving, with the absolute most critical time for getting donations coming up, because this was a non-profit, I walked into work and cleaned out my desk, then walked right back out, sent an email from the parking lot to my boss, HR, and the board saying I quit because I wouldn't be disrespected anymore. My boss was the reason literally every other manager quit within 3 months. She's running the whole place by herself, deeply in the red, with almost no chance to recover. Yeah, no job, no matter what the salary, the pay is worth putting yourself at risk for having a cardiac event or any kind of mental breakdown over the job. So good for you for sticking to your guns and walking out of there. Story 25. I worked ride photo at an amusement park when I was a teen. First 2 seasons were great. That boss I liked. Third season, new boss, smug a-hole. My younger brother, his first season, and I told him we were still dependent on our parents for transportation. My father even came in on the interview and told him as much. He smiled and agreed that would be the case. It was not the case. From day one, we had radically different schedules. It was very rare we were picked up at the same time. Parents were frustrated, and when pressed, the manager claimed he wasn't told about our need to have the same schedule and that it would be impossible to do since it would be unfair to other employees. One day, halfway through the season, I was set to work from mid-afternoon to close, but because of my parents' schedules, I had to be dropped off in the morning. Opening team for my station called out, and boss found out I was in the park. I tried to refuse being assigned a double, but boss said I would have to or else, then acted like he was generous in letting me an additional 15-minute break for a 16-plus hour workday. Then he edited my timesheet so I would only get paid for 12, so that he didn't have to report overtime. If I had known then that was illegal, that would have been pursued. I was scheduled to open the next day, and after getting home after 2 a.m., I called in, then the next day after just quit, and so did my brother. The FU came when it was time to collect our final checks. It wasn't even planned. We arrived at our normal time to get our checks, and boss was nowhere to be found. He was running late. Our dad was waiting in the car, getting more angry as time passed, though he wasn't directing it at us. I almost wish he would have been allowed to come into the park with us, if only for the catharsis of getting to bark at this clown of a boss. Boss made a serious error that day. He left his bag in the office. While we were waiting, I told my bro to stand watch. The night before, we'd had chili for dinner. Yes, I crapped in his bag. Hilariously, there were stores of chemicals for developing film, even though they just transitioned to digital, just in case. So there were frequent issues with dead rats due to poisoning. The boss caught the whiff of my FU and thought it was another dead rat. We were halfway out of the park when we heard him find my exit interview. Okay, so I don't know when this took place, but gifting a Louis Vuitton on the way out of a job is probably the best mic drop moment I have ever heard about, so good for you. Story 26. At a former job, I heard the owner/CEO snort coke from his office. Should have seen the red flags coming as he asked in my onboarding to bring my own laptop. This was before BYOD, so they had no money for a work PC for me. When I eventually got a PC, it was running a torrented copy of Windows. It was a tiny office and people would use instant messaging rather than talk to each other. The editor had less experience than me. She threw a newspaper at me once to show me a story, and slept with the CEO during a Las Vegas trip. Attended an industry conference where the sketchier company, the prettier booth babe would be. Talking of which, this place actually hired one, who was also a fitness influencer, as a VP of investor relations. Only the type of relations was being pimped out to dinner with executives at companies they wanted to do business with. I hated that place and walked out after a year. I printed out my resignation letter in Comic Sans and left it on the CEO's desk and took a screenshot of my desktop and used that as wallpaper and hid my folder icons, so clicking them wouldn't work. Story 27. Late 1980s. I worked for a company that had a proto-email system for internal use. A colleague once told me there was a bug in the system that meant unopened emails from an account that had been closed down would get stuck in the recipient's box and couldn't be opened nor deleted. Head office had to do a manual database patch, which could take days to get scheduled. One of the managers was an absolute jerkhead, aloof, disdainful, treated the workers like something he found on a shoe, changed his name to something unbelievably ridiculous to be more macho-sounding, think along the lines of Rambo Strongman, was also very crap at his job, and I had a few run-ins with him because of this. A year or so after being in the job, a friend of mine offered me a better job at the company he owned, which meant I didn't need a reference from my current employer. On my final day, Jerkhead was out of the office all afternoon at a meeting or something. I sent him about 20 emails with subjects like, "Rambo is a jerkhead, you suck your mother's a-hole," etc. Then I asked IT to close down my email account with immediate effect. I was later told the ensuing tantrum lasted about a week. Story 28. This is a minor one, but at my first job, one day I swiped in 82 seconds late, 1 minute and 22 seconds. The duty manager at the time called me into the office straight away and started a huge rant about how terrible a person I am. Those cans on the shelves won't straighten themselves, and obviously, if they're not straight, then planes will just fall out of the sky, and puppies will die. Anyway, the whole time he was doing this, he was fidgeting with the bureau, and at one point he unwittingly took the lid off, then turned the pin so that the nib was against his white shirt, and he was kind of drawing on his own shirt. So I decided I'd keep arguing, keep it going. I'd back down a little until it seemed like it was coming to an end, then say something to make him explode again. He hated his authority being questioned, or me suggesting that I'd talk to the real manager. After this went on long enough for my liking, I stood up and said, "I wasted a minute or so. You've wasted 20 minutes of both our time, and you've been drawing on yourself." Story 29. I left 2 hours into my shift and then didn't show up for the next day for my shift until after lunch, only to turn in my badge and keys and turned around and didn't look back, nor did I give her the satisfaction of an explanation, and then reported her and her boss, who was involved in the reason I left, to the corporate office for all the things they were doing that they were not supposed to do, including that they allowed me to be sexually harassed by a resident, nursing home job, for the entirety of my employment without any action, to the point where the man was actively trying to grab my ass and tits while I was working, even in front of them, and making very sexual comments to me about wanting to F me and whatnot, and telling me that we were getting married whether I liked it or not, despite my constant denies and telling him to stop and reporting the behavior daily. They blamed it on his personality, but I was the only person he did that to, and I had to deal with that for almost a year. I quit a week before my 1-year mark after that because they yelled at me and gaslighted me and reprimanded me for reporting it to them again, and then going to HR the final time in the morning because they didn't want HR involved or anything done about it because they liked to laugh at me about it, which is when I just decided to walk out without a word. Just a quick PSA for people that want to post in future Reddit videos. Please, don't post run-on sentences. I gotta go catch my breath now. Okay, story 30. Cutting a long story short, I was hired as a marketing manager. My boss, who happened to be the MD, tried it on with me, and I obviously rejected his advances. He then decided as punishment, but without making it official, that I would basically be relegated to being his PA and left me out of all the marketing decision-making processes. Fine by me, I was an overpaid secretary. As I was handling all his admin, it didn't take me long to find some discrepancies. He was ordering things like business cards, letterheads, promotion promotional materials, advertising, etc. from one particular supplier at highly inflated prices that never actually materialized. I figured there must be some sort of mistake. Took it to him, and he essentially told me it was none of my business and he would sort it out. It was obvious he was falsely ordering goods and services and taking a cash payment from the supplier in question. So he did some digging and made a separate file on everything he ordered that didn't arrive or advertising that wasn't published, and it probably amounted to $100K. Shortly afterwards, I was made redundant. I dropped the entire file into his boss on my last day, and as I walked by his office window, tapped on the glass and gave him the V sign. Story 31. Big thread, not likely to get seen. But this is something that has forever changed the trajectory of my life. I was working as a municipal arborist for a city in Northern Virginia, outside DC. I had been there 6 years. My peer retired, and they hired a new guy to replace him. My boss, who had been there for decades, then retired. So I took on all his responsibilities. Having literally zero experience managing budgets, projecting out quarterly expenses, tracking invoices for our contractors, etc., I was doing great, in my opinion. And that of my division chief. They interviewed both me and the new guy for my old boss's job. They gave it to the new guy. I was devastated. As lame as it sounds, I've always dreamed of being a city arborist, which is a middle manager basically, but I've always wanted to run an urban forestry program of my own. About a month later, I interviewed for the city arborist position of a very high-profile city in Southern California, where my wife is from originally. I get the job. On my last day, I hand over the keys to the dude. No ill will to him. He shot his shot. I showed him how I handled the budget, projections, incoming resident requests, transferring work to the contractor, and closing out the processes. After about an hour of running through all the systems I had built up, previous old boss did everything on paper, he looks at me, dead ass in the eyes, and says, which I'll never forget, "Wow, this is all a lot of work. You were doing this on your own? So, sell my house, say goodbye to all my friends, throw away everything I own, and move across the country to start a new life. Not obtaining that goal is something I still cry about in quiet moments by myself. So I start my new job and my new life in SoCal. It's hard. The city has never had a city arborist before, but as it goes, I'm finding success and making a positive impact on tree canopy and building a program from scratch. I hear from friends that the hiring manager who didn't give me the job quit and moved away because it was going horribly wrong. The guy was not up to the task. Then he quits and gets a higher paying job in another county about 1.5 years in. They asked me to interview for the position and relocate my family back. My heart. I truly love that city in Virginia. So I interview, willing to toss the excess I had carved out behind and have my old life back and pick up where I wanted to be. They offered the job to another person who researches how in shambles the department is and turns down the offer. Hiring manager reaches out to me on my personal email address and encourages me to reapply. F all of that. So I don't know if that's a final F you, but I know I would have been successful. And it sucks to know the residents are the true victims of management's incompetence. But after 2 years, I'm just now finally starting to get over that devastating defeat and living my dream of having a municipal forestry job that I can build and craft. Story 32. My boss and his coworkers delegated their job to me for about 5 years. 3 people in all. I did their work for them for 5 years. When I gave my 2-week notice, rage quit when they hired someone that was green and gave them $15K per year more than me. The individual reported to me directly. They booked me for an entire week to, quote, teach them how to do my job. I sat there for an entire week and played dumb. Said I didn't know how to do what they wanted me to teach them, their own jobs. By the end of the week, they were pretty much bribing me to teach them how to do their own jobs. As a final FU, after not teaching them how to maintain and update a huge volumetric blending calculator that they took my name off and put their names on, I changed one of the calculations by a decimal point before turning my computer in. That decimal would have been almost impossible to find if you didn't know how to maintain the calculator, and would have cost them hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars before they found it. When they found it, they tried to blame me for it, and when I got a threatening phone call, I said, "Is my name on any of the work?" To which the person on the other end said, "No, it's these people's names." All 3 of them are unemployable now because the industry is small and the mistake stuck with them. Story 33. Worked at a gas station for a few months in 2019. No shows were common, and I was forced to work doubles all the time simply because the night crew never showed up. I never saw the overtime on my check either. had a coworker decide to leave her abusive boyfriend, who was my assistant manager's brother. When my coworker left the boyfriend, she stayed at my apartment for a bit so she could get back on her feet. My assistant manager gave my address to the boyfriend, but didn't know what apartment I lived in, so he went through every building, banging on the doors. Eventually, he got to my apartment. I never answered the door, just kind of watched him from the window. I immediately texted my manager asking why her brother was at my apartment. He got a phone call and left pretty quickly after that. Fast forward a week, I'm working a double again. The same manager who gave out my address says she's going to come in and cover, but shows up about an hour before close. At this point, my 10-hour shift had turned into a 16-hour shift. Ended up deciding not to show up the next day during her shift as a FU. On top of this, I filed a report over to the corporate overlords and found out about a month later most of the staff and management was completely replaced. Felt pretty good. Story 34. I was hired on as a new engineer, and admittedly, the owner really liked me. In that first week, though, I realized that I was the only one he was nice to. He treated all the other engineers, who were far more qualified than me, like garbage. One of their senior engineers made a super simple mistake and was verbally reamed by the owner. The owner decided the engineer no longer deserved his personal office and was told to switch spots with me. The noob. I was already incredibly uncomfortable with the company dynamics, and it was even more awkward when I had to clear off my small desk and move my stuff into the senior engineer's office, which I knew I didn't earn or deserve. I made a point from that day on to befriend the senior engineer and make it clear I was not happy with the way he was treated. We went out to lunch every day and hung out on the weekends, going hiking in national parks and trying out the new bars in our city. All said, we became really close friends. About a month later, I'm called into the owner's office and told that they would be letting some engineers go. Of course, being the last one hired on, I think I'm about to get laid off, but nope. Instead, the owner thought it was a better idea to vent all his frustrations to me about the senior engineer, which were all personal and not at all related to his performance as an employee. The owner wanted me to step up and assume the senior manager role and asked if I'd be willing to accept that responsibility. I said no, I was too new and still had a lot to learn before I would feel comfortable accepting that level of responsibility. The owner assured me I had what it takes and walked straight to the senior engineer's desk and fired him on the spot in front of everyone. I was mortified. The senior engineer and the owner exchanged some choice words, and with that, the senior engineer was gone. I was pissed. The owner knew I was good friends with the senior engineer and put me in a spot to make it seem like I was stealing his role. I stayed at the company for another week and used that time to pretend that I was stepping up and becoming the new senior engineer. In reality, I was applying for other companies most of the day and looking for my way out ASAP. Typically, I'd communicate my concerns directly with the owner, but I was so upset with the way he treated employees that I went out to lunch one afternoon and just never came back. The owner left me several messages, claiming that their business was in jeopardy of going under if I didn't come back, and even offered me a huge pay increase. I just couldn't accept it. It didn't align with my morals, and there was no way I'd voluntarily accept the role knowing how he treated my friend. Flash forward a week or two, and me and the senior engineer are out having drinks, and he mentions that the owner reached out to him and begged for him to come back. The senior engineer apparently laughed and hung up. We heard through the grapevine that the two other engineers quit shortly after me, and the company closed their doors in less than 3 months. I'm not saying I'm happy about how everything went down, but I am pleased to know that the owner, no doubt, learned a great deal that year about how to treat others. Story 35. This wasn't really instructional, but I can't say I wasn't slightly pleased with part of how it turned out. We'd had a change in management, and I did not like the new boss. I know this story will be a lot less compelling if I don't go into why, but I don't like to get into it. I'll be mad all day if I do. Just an all-around bully. I started looking for new work after about 3 months. In the meantime, I found a troublesome lump. In between job interviews, I was also going to a lot of doctor's offices. MRI, biopsy, multiple specialist meet and greets. I've got a lot of priority scheduling. They were concerned. I wound up accepting a position in a different department with the same organization. I know that's considered a poor career move, but I was motivated not to have a health insurance gap. Internal transfers were always asked to stay in their old position for 4 to 6 weeks before switching. I wound up being asked to stay for the full 6 weeks. I had a feeling that my then boss was going to make them very unpleasant. But only a few days after that was announced, I got a call. The docs determined that they need to operate. They had an opening and can do it next Tuesday. Otherwise, I would have to wait for months, and they didn't think that was a good idea. I would need at least 1 to 2 months to recover. Obviously, my overall feeling was, F it. But that was a satisfying conversation with my boss. She was so deflated. Couldn't say I dodged a bullet. Guess I got hit by one bullet and it nudged me out of the way of a second bullet. Also, it turned out to be benign, and I like my new boss. Story 36. My wife and I were in the final few months before our wedding. I was working as a behavioral health technician, glorified babysitter, at the substance abuse treatment facility in town. I had told my supervisor and my boss months ahead of time when our wedding was, and when our honeymoon was. I even went into our computer system and put into the time off system. Their response was, "That's great, we'll make sure it's in our calendar. Just make sure to remind us 2 weeks before so we can put it on the schedule." Fast forward to 2 weeks before the wedding and honeymoon. I checked the time off system in the computer and my request has been denied. When I confronted my supervisor about it, he told me, "Yeah, I'm sorry, but 2 weeks isn't enough notice to find a replacement for the 9 days you'll be gone. You'll have off day of your wedding, but you're either going to have to find people to cover your shift or you'll have to come in." I told them, "Yeah, sure, I understand completely." Cue to the day after my wedding. My wife and I are sitting at the international airport waiting to board our flight to Mexico for 8 days. About 30 minutes after my shift was supposed to start, I get a phone call from my supervisor. "Hey, Israel, where are you at? You're 30 minutes late." "Oh, hey, I'm getting ready to board my plane to Mexico." If I could have seen his face, I'm sure it looked exactly like the surprised Pikachu face. Never thought about work once while I was in Mexico. Had a blast. 10 out of 10 would recommend. When I got back, I never bothered calling them back. And within a couple weeks after, found a much better job. It was a nice extended vacation. Employers, when we're putting in for time off, it's us letting you know we aren't going to be there. And it's your responsibility to find coverage, not mine. Don't tell me it's okay, then cut the rug from underneath me because you failed to do your job. They had really high turnover rate, as you can imagine. Story 37. I worked for a company that the boss had sold and then had to take back as the buyer failed to make the payments. He was miserable. Everyone in the company was miserable, but I was hired to bring back the pep to the company. Fix its spirit, if you will. The first red flag was his requirement to have 5:30 a.m. manager meetings at the local Dunkin' Donuts. Okay, you're an early bird. We'll try it. And still work until 6 or 7 that evening. Next, when I came up with my 16-point plan, he wanted me to personally reorganize the warehouse instead of have the warehouse workers do it. I tried to tell him that they'll learn nothing without going through the exercise, but he held firm. Part of this was to pick up a container of merchandise from the docks in Long Beach. I took the company van and drove at 4 a.m. to get there, sit in line with all the other trucks for 6 hours, then slog back in traffic. He was angry at me for being out of the office for an entire day. I could go on, but these are the high points. I left after 3 months, and the guy tried to blame me for his failing company by threatening to sue me, slandering me and stalking me. Somebody, who may or may not be writing this post, called the IRS about his failure to pay correct taxes in 4 of the 5 previous years. He did a 14-month stint in Fed prison. Story 38. Oh boy, there's a lot of comments, so this is probably going to get buried. It was the Monday after Thanksgiving, and my clumsy ass slipped and fell in my garage and landed awkwardly on my hand. I played it off, thinking it was just a sprain. I had an employee call in, so I had to cover her route, and about 3 hours in, my hand swells up to the size of a tennis ball, so I call my zone general manager. We were DOT certified, and I needed to know what to do if I get put in a cast. His response was, "I don't know, dude. Figure it out for your own damn self." I called HR the next day, and she was extremely shocked he behaved that way, and told me to take the next day off for a mental health day. The day after my day off, I came back and discovered he came down to my depot and called a locksmith to break into my office and tried to find discriminating evidence to fire me. Walked right out on the spot, because F all that. Story 39. When I was younger, late teens/early 20s, I worked with my at the time girlfriend for a fast food breakfast/coffee chain. My boss was an a-hole who did nothing, gave 2 craps about his employees, and basically sat on his ass while collecting a paycheck. My girlfriend got off work and slipped me a note. I went into the bathroom to read that she was breaking up with me. The only reason I worked there was because we were dating and I wanted some extra cash while spending some time with her. We were in college, living with our respective parents, so we didn't have a lot of time to ourselves. I told my boss that something came up and I needed to leave. He said something like, "You're not leaving just because your girlfriend got off work." That was it. I took off my hat, threw it at him, exclaimed that I quit, and walked out. In retrospect, I get where he was coming from and why it looked that way, and sure, leaving like I did because of a breakup probably wasn't the most professional thing to do, but I hated that man and that job, so I was basically looking for a reason at that point. It's not like I would have returned the next day, even if I had stayed to finish my shift. I realize this was a pretty long comment for an otherwise unimpressive response. Story 40. Worked in a kitchen under a dude who worked in Hell's Kitchen, but not the kind you see on TV. I was 18 and this dude was straight up abusive. It's appropriate to be passionate and be a hard charger when it comes to food, but this dude was just way out of line. He ran the kitchen like it was actually Hell's Kitchen, but the restaurant was a barbecue joint and microbrewery. The environment didn't warrant someone of that nature. He had a habit of telling people they need to come in on Mondays within a day's notice. There was no scheduling or anything. He just chose who would come in on Monday for prep and that's it. I guess after a while of people actually giving valid reasons why they can't come in, i.e. people weren't in town or they had obligations, he sent out a message something along the lines of, I don't care what you have going on. If I schedule you on a Monday, you're here on Monday. I don't care if you're on vacation to the Bahamas. You'll be here when I tell you to or your job is gone. Well, it came down to me, 18-year-old kid who was already pretty much the female dog of the restaurant, being berated and threatened all the time, having food thrown at me by the head chef for messing up orders, the usual. I was on my way to Myrtle Beach, which was 12 hours of a drive. I put a vacation request in the day I started working there months in advance, and I've been an employee there for over a year. I knew the routine, but I was over it. I had a vacation, and I wasn't skipping it. I got a message from the Walmart version of Gordon Ramsay saying I'm working Monday. I told him that I'm halfway to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and that's not going to work. He immediately fired me. I have the message saved from years ago. This was the message that I sent. I apologize for not being able to come into work on a Monday, even though I gave you my vacation time in advance. I don't understand how you think it's okay to act this way towards your employees, but I find it to be a weight off my shoulders that I don't work for you anymore. If you expect someone to drop what they're doing to come work with you, like driving 6 hours back home and postponing a vacation to cut tomatoes on a Monday, you're out of your mind. Working for you has been the worst time of my life. I've never felt stress and anger as much as I have in the time I've worked under you. I had a passion for cooking and a love for the industry, but you effing destroyed that for me and turned me bitter. You have no respect for me. You're a horrible boss, manager, and head chef. I wish you nothing but the absolute worst for you and your time as a head chef, and I mean that from the deepest parts of my heart. I expect to have my last check mailed to me. Have a nice life and enjoy the power while you have it. That was the best feeling ever. Story 41. I spent 2 years as a temporary assistant, and when I finally made my way into a permanent position, it was with the witchiest elderly lady as a unit supervisor with no heart. My luck, of course. At first, she acted sweet and kind, but I quickly learned that she was actually a micromanager, and just genuinely hated her staff or her job, or both. Made all of us in the unit miserable. Made other units she has no business meddling in or miserable, and caused major mental health issues for some. Nobody liked her there. For some reason, at the end of my time with that office, she really started picking on me for everything. The shoes I wore to the office the few days I was out of the week, while others wore flip-flops, and not to mention our offices were closed to the public. If I went to the bathroom, she was messaging our entire group on Teams asking where I went after all of 2 minutes of being away. We had a policy where we had to lock our computers when stepping out, which made us look away longer than we were. She'd also say to do one thing and then call ranting and raving, saying she actually meant to do another thing. Inconsistent as hell. Eventually, most of us shut down and started telling her she was hard to talk to and communicate with. She didn't want to hear it. In her eyes, she was their best employee, and we were all to be her good little minions. I secretly applied out when I passed probation, got offered an interview, and managed to sneak away to do the virtual interview in the car, even though we were allowed to use company time for any interviews within the place. I just simply didn't want her to know. A few weeks later, I got offered the job that I did that interview for, cried out of happiness, and accepted. I didn't tell this lady until I had my probationary passing meeting. She droned on about how awful of a worker I was. Funny how my other coworkers told me different, how I didn't communicate with her, etc. So when the meeting wrapped up and she asked if I had any questions, I simply said, no questions, but I'm just letting you know I've accepted another offer and I'll be leaving the department entirely. Her face dropped, and I'll never forget how stupid and dumbfounded she looked on the other end of the camera. She, of course, panicked and started saying I need to send her all the proof of my interviews and the emails between myself and HR, when I accepted this new job, what my new supervisor's name was, etc., claiming she needed to do so to fill my position. I immediately contacted HR and they shut her down so fast that she came back at me with, "Why are you getting HR involved? Do you think I'm trying to hold you back from promoting?" Yeah, I do, considering my new boss has nothing to do with you. Come to find out, the female dog had so many HR complaints that I added to the pile. No wonder she was upset. Story 42. Told him I was quitting. He went ballistic, throwing crap around and screaming. I walked out and didn't take any of his repeated calls. Why was he repeatedly calling me, you ask? Well, we were getting ready to roll out a new service. This was well before any time of sane identity and access management tools were in place. So the entire functionality of this new service was dependent on one 32-character password that had asked me to change the week before and not share with anyone else. He was even dumb enough to make that request in public and in an email. So that's precisely what I did, and a week after I left, I knew at the time I was probably leaving, but I wasn't certain. A week down the road, they started irreversibly rolling customers to the new system, only to find out it would only run in temporary demo mode without the password. They were well and truly effed. I was well and truly happy. And yes, when I went to quit, number one on my to-do list was to share the password with him. He screamed and threw and slammed the door, so I gave him the best middle finger I knew how. Story 43. I worked a contracted position. It was a temporary job, but I was contractually obligated to work the full 90-day probation period before I could move to a job that better fit me. I just needed a job at the time, and any would do. Apparently, it was a difficult position to fill due to the weird hours. The job paid terrible and gave me depression. I was making $200 a week, 50 of which went to public transportation. 100 went to rent. My rent was $900, and my partner was paying most of it. And this was the same time his pay was reduced at his job, and $50 went to food. It really was desperate times, but I knew I just had to stick it out for 90 days and I could move on. Anyway, my job tried to steal time from me. Not much, just 15 minutes a day, but after 6 days, that's an hour and a half of pay. I couldn't afford to lose that money. So I bring it up with my boss and they get really mad at me and tell me to stop, quote, quibbling over minutes. Another to mention is that the company I work for was losing the contract and the employees were either staying with the job site and switching contract companies or staying with the contract company and leaving the job site. I chose the contract company. My 90 days ended 1 month before the job site contract ended. My boss called me into the office on my last day and told me, "You're staying till job site contract end date." He didn't think he was telling me. I looked at him like he had 3 heads, laughed and said, "No, I finished my 90 days. He got mad and said, "Let me give you some advice. Playing nice will get you farther in this field." I said, "Let me give you some advice. Don't tell someone making only $200 a week to not quibble over minutes when committing time theft against them." He said, "Get out of my office." So I did and went home. They probably had a really hard time filling that position for the last month of the contract since they couldn't use the 90-day period to keep anyone there anymore. I hope it sucked for everyone involved. F all them female dogs. Story 44. In 2008, I got caught in a great financial layoff due to the global crisis. I had a good friend hook me up with a government consulting firm. They were small, a bit unprofessional, but stable. I began building up their business, negotiating new contracts, which seemed to make the CEO jealous or paranoid because the next week I was called into his office with his executive team and accused me of taking over the company. This was absolutely ludicrous and told them as such. As a consequence, instead of working local so I could be close with my friends as they were younger at the time, he decided I needed to travel every week, even after I told him I didn't want to travel when I started. The market was still tight, so I was forced to concede. I did the travel for 6 months. I built up several major engagements over this time period tied to my strategy. After all the deals were signed, I quit immediately and took my strategy with me. The CEO called me the next day asking for the strategy needed for the engagements. I told him since I tried to take over the company, maybe he should come up with his own. Hung up the phone, blocked his number. Story 45. After they cut my pay by over $4,000 a year, I was very unhappy. But what pushed me over the edge was the complete lack of teamwork that reached the point of hindering my performance. Nobody wanted to communicate or help each other anymore. My manager wouldn't even look me in the eye, let alone say good morning or to update me on new procedures, which put me in conflict with my team. I almost got in a fight with a team member in front of everyone because of this. So I got called into a disciplinary meeting. By this point, their crap was played out. telling me every couple of weeks that we're family, my job is safe, then calling me into meetings again and again to threaten me with termination for any reason we like. Well, this time I brought an apple, the kind you eat, and while my team leader chewed me out, I sat there and calmly ate my apple in front of him. Finally, when he was done and I was done, I proceeded to chew him out, taking him to task for his lack of leadership and lacking the effort to communicate and connect with his team. To his credit, he listened, and I made good points that he will work on improving. That was good, but did you forget that they cut my pay by $4,300? I sure as crap didn't. I didn't effing forget that during my interview. I had taken this job because he had told me the sky's the limit for how much I could make and do in this position. No, I did not forget, and I certainly did not forgive. What he did not know was that I was finally in the position to buy a farm, and I was so over and done with this job and office life. I was waiting on finalizing the moving date, so I wasn't ready to quit or get fired on the spot. Although if I had gotten fired, I could have taken unemployment, which would have benefited me financially. Please be advised that I was aware it wasn't his decision to cut my pay. It was corporate, so you know. Because of his willingness to put his pride aside in the meeting, I told him, and because the meeting went well, I got off with a warning, I promised to tell him everything in a couple weeks when the time was right for me. 2 weeks later, he must have forgotten the whole thing, because when I called him to a meeting, he was taken off guard. I told him that I bought a farm. It was hours away from the city, and I had no intention of commuting. I gave my notice. All he could do was tell me that he was jealous and wish me the best. Damn, that felt good, and I love farming. Much better suited to it. I've never looked back. At least he heard you out and took it in stride and, said he was jealous and wished you well. I mean, what more could you ask for? You don't necessarily need to burn the place down on your way out, so yeah. Story 46. My job at a grocery store got a new interim store manager that was trying to make me do tasks not in my job description. She would also nitpick things about my department, and I know I'm biased in saying so, but trust me when I say that I ran a tight ship in my area and it did not need to be scrutinized by her. Eventually, I got called into her office with my AM, who knew how hard of a worker I was and how proficient I was, yet didn't talk in my defense at all, and she grilled me about not cleaning out the drainage grates. I told her that's not my job. Then I had to endure a long diatribe about how that's not being a team player and blah blah blah. The meeting made me so mad. Right after work, I went and applied for a much better job on a whim. Well, lucky me, I got a call right away for an interview and got the job not too long after that day. So, on a Wednesday, I gave my AM my 2-week notice, but also said, the last week I'm taking my vacation. Oh, and here's my sick leave notice for Friday and Saturday. My AM paused and said, so tomorrow's your last day? I smile and go, yeah, I guess it is. This was right around Memorial Day, and holiday shoppers were blowing plenty of things out, and I was one of the few people that showed up every day and always did my best to go above and beyond within reason. So what I heard from my coworkers at the time, the spineless AM that never stuck up for me in that meeting, had to pull extra hours that whole holiday weekend in order to do my job in my absence, while I enjoyed a nice vacation visiting my family before starting my new job. That new job has gone on to open huge doors for me and bring me to a very lucrative, stable job that I enjoy. So I win. Story 47. There's a long build up to this. One autumn, I get married. For various reasons, we wanted to wait for spring to do a honeymoon, and we were lucky enough to be able to afford a longer honeymoon. I submitted the time off request about a month after my wedding. My boss and her boss said they'd need to think about it. Understandable, it's a big ask, but I'm about 6 months out from the vacation dates at this point, so I didn't expect it'll be terribly unreasonable to figure out. 2 months go by, we're still thinking about it. In the meantime, annual raises happened. I had gotten awards that year for my work. My raise was a very tiny percentage of my wage, like barely a cost of living increase, and then I was told I should be happy because it was one of the largest in the company that year. That was when I decided that I didn't care if they approved my honeymoon or not. We were going when we wanted. We started booking things to make sure we had what we wanted at a price we could handle. At the 2 months mark, they call me into the boss's office. They can't give me that much time off, nor can I have it when I want. That's the busy time of the year. I can have much less time a month later. I pretend to go along with it, and I mark my calendar for 3 weeks before the date we're actually leaving. Hey, it's 3 weeks before my honeymoon. I put in my 2 weeks' notice. I claim I have another job offer. My team is all sad to see me go, yada yada yada. 3 days left to go, and my boss and I are chatting. My honeymoon comes up, and how I'm starting a job right before leaving for that. Something clicks for her. Maybe she realizes we're just over a week out from my original request date. Maybe she sees something in my face. She goes a little pale and looks at me like, "Did you really quit because we wouldn't accommodate your honeymoon?" I just made eye contact and nodded slowly. We moved on with the charade. I left and really enjoyed my honeymoon. I had a new and less skeezy feeling job about 2 weeks after we got home. All was right within the world. Side note, I have absolutely no guilt about this whole thing. I'm a woman, and had I been pregnant, they would have had about as much warning, and I would have had probably more maternity leave than my proposed vacation. Also, I would have had a baby to need time for afterwards. I think my ask was at least reasonable. Second worst place I ever worked, and that's worse than the fast food jobs. OP, you didn't do anything wrong. You gave them 6 months notice, and I mean, it's hard to not see this as a very petty move on their behalf. So, way to stand your ground, stick to your guns, and, take that honeymoon that you deserve. Story 48. When I was making minimum wage and working at a restaurant, I had the absolute worst boss as my manager. Eventually, I had enough, and I spent like 1/3 of my second to last paycheck on ordering a small, custom-made trophy with the inscription "World's Worst Manager" along with the manager's name on it. Her name, aptly, was Karen before it was a meme. Then I slipped it in her purse while it was unattended in the office while being on camera, with a big grin on my face. She goes home, finds it, and is livid. Next time I come to work, she's so angry that she literally looks different. I work as usual till lunch. Then I see our district manager, Tom. Nice guy, visit our dining room. He's obviously here to fire/terminate me. But before he does so, he has a little chat with me, as most of the previous interactions I've had with him have been positive. He was equally disappointed and fascinated and asked me, "So you made her a medal?" I replied, "No, not a medal, but a beautiful trophy in her honor." He couldn't help but smirk a bit, and you could tell this was the first time he's experienced something like it. Then he proceeded to fire me, albeit very nicely and softly, as he was just the messenger, and handed me my last paycheck. I waltz out of that place like Mary Poppins, smiling from ear to ear. Story 49. I had worked for a company for a long time, more than a decade, when I got a new boss. I knew what needed to be done and did it, and for his first year, he pretty much left me alone. I was the technical lead in my department on a new project when some switch flipped, and he went full micromanager mode. He would make changes to the project specs without consulting the rest of the project team or the project manager. He'd tell engineers working under me to do something different without telling me. When pressed to explain why he was making X, Y, or Z change, he'd puff up and say, "You're just going to have to trust my experience," and not offer any valid engineering justification. He'd also try to tell other departments what they were going to have to do differently, too, which went as well as you can imagine. The engineers in that office were pretty chill, so most folks just ignored him and let the department heads deal with him. But he was my department head, and ignoring him was hard. After about 6 months of this, I'd had it, and went to talk to my grand boss, who was at a director level and had been my temporary boss for about 8 months before Crazy Dude was hired, and I generally trusted. We talked it out, had a group meeting where my boss tried to make it out that I was the unreasonable one. Let it suffice to say that I had a 10-year reputation as being the reasonable person in every discussion. On the other hand, boss and grand boss had known each other for years before coming here, and regularly hung out at each other's houses. I knew this was going to be an uphill battle. Things were okay for about a fortnight before the problematic behaviors started popping back up. 3 months after the first meeting, we had another, with more talking and still no action. I started looking for other internal positions, but there wasn't any spare seats that I would fit in. About 2 months after the second meeting, there was a third meeting, where I was clear that the problem needed to be resolved immediately or I was out. About 2 months later, I was out, with a new job already queued up. About a month after that, I got a phone call from a colleague I thought highly of, who was on that project team, asking if I'd be willing to be a reference for them, since they were leaving the company. I told them that I would happily give a good reference to anyone who reached out to me, but that I had 2 questions. 1, are you leaving because of Crazy Dude? And 2, if Crazy Dude wasn't causing trouble, would you rather stay? Turns out, my former boss had been continuing to cause significant problems. He was openly yelling at people in meetings, undermining other people's work, and continuing to try to boss around people who were not in his department. His department was up to about 50% turnover turnover in a year. My colleague was indeed leaving because, and only because, of my crazy ex-boss. Our next conversation was short and brutally effective. Me: hey friend, I know your boss, who was at a director level, and think highly of her. How do you feel about her? Colleague: she's great. I love working for her. Me: you're a tremendous asset to the company, and it would be a shame for them to lose you. I think you should talk to your boss. Tell her that you're going to quit if you have to keep working with Crazy Dude, and give her a chance to do something about it. I think she'll pull through for you, and worst case scenario, I will still sing your praises to any potential employer. Colleague: okay, I'll see what happens. 6 weeks later, Crazy Dude is no longer employed at the company. Sometime later, I gave my much happier colleague a call and asked how things went down. Well, my colleague's boss hauled my grand boss, both are director level folks if you recall, in front of the VP they both reported to, told VP that her valuable reports were being driven out of the company because of grand boss's employee, who had also been driving out his own reports. Apparently, the VP looked at my grand boss and said, "You have 2 weeks to fix this problem." Within 2 weeks, my crazy ex-boss was out of a job. So there was my contribution. I tossed the pebble that started the avalanche that swept my boss out of his job, after I had already quit. Story 50. I'm a geochemistry specialist, but before starting a career in geochemistry, university days, I used to do some web services. I was working as a WordPress developer for some publishing house. However, and because they were just getting started, my salary wasn't that good. After like a month, I started realizing that I was not only doing the thing I was hired for, but I was basically doing all the tasks that require somebody who's good with programming and designing. I talked to him about that, and he said that he'll compensate me. A month after, I got a job offer to work as a geochemistry specialist abroad. I started doing the paperwork, but I couldn't complete the required paperwork because my boss had not paid me for that month. When I asked my boss for my salary, he told me he needed more time to pay me. As I left his office, I overheard him telling his secretary, who was also his wife, that he wasn't going to pay me anything because he didn't think my job was a real job. Furious, I went straight to my girlfriend to vent, and we decided to come up with a plan for revenge. In short, I took the job offer abroad and left my boss in the middle of a huge project, which cost him doubles and doubles to finish as he had to hire people who didn't have the skills to complete the work. He lost a lot of money and eventually suggested finishing the project and paying me my monthly salary as a daily rate. And here was my opportunity to say no. F you. Story 51. It's not so much that I didn't like my boss, it's just that he allowed my coworkers to completely dump their responsibilities on me with no consequences just because they were members of the team before me. So I told my boss I would be changing teams starting next year, and even offered to help him with the transition until he would get to replace me. He kindly refused and allowed me to go. As a token for my appreciation for the fact that he was also my mentor, I did some remaining paperwork for him that had to be turned in during the morning of my first day leaving. My ex-teammate that had a habit of showing up for work whenever he felt like it arrived at work in time for the first time in what felt like forever because they were worried that the paperwork wouldn't be done. I couldn't let that effort of his go to waste, so I held the papers and allowed him to do his job for the first time since I met him. A couple months later, I get to learn that their team is in shambles when it comes to paperwork. The one member of the team that knows how to do it properly barely has any time due to the fact that he works part-time somewhere else, and the other members routinely fail in doing it. Also, while they're probing all over the workplace to find a replacement for the position I left open. Meanwhile, I'm as happy as I've ever been because my new boss actually splits both the workload and the benefits evenly between us. I have so much free time that I literally didn't know what to do with it, and my body, which was conditioned for 60-ish hour work weeks, now began falling asleep at 6 p.m. because it wasn't used to being awake at home for more than 3 hours, and I actually have a much closer relationship with my boss because he actually talks to me like I'm his buddy instead of insisting on me calling him boss. I know it's still a boss-employee relationship, but it helps a lot with morale, especially when he allows us to make fun of him and just basically try to make the work environment as friendly as possible. Story 52. A little late to this one, but whatever. This is my short tale of how I quit retail for good. I was poached by a district manager for Big Lots from my salaried position at the grocery chain. I had a good rapport with her initially, but that obviously faded pretty quickly since I don't have a filter and will call people out on their bullcrap pretty quickly. The first month I was in my new store, after the 1 month training at another store. We had inventory done. Being from a decade-plus grocery background, I already knew the process. It was very similar. Anyways, I found a huge box full of just random accessories that should have been thrown away, but the district manager and store manager wanted to keep them on the books to keep their numbers looking good. Fast forward 5 months, and I'm tired of the same bullcrap that made me leave my former job. We had inventory coming up in a few weeks, and my store manager went on vacation. I was already hurt and on painkillers from an injury on the job, so I said F it. The day my store manager went on vacation, I cleared that stupid box out. It was literally almost $1,500 worth of items. For clarification, this is not a normal little box. It was a box that a recliner is shipped in. The thing is massive. A few days later, my district manager and store manager were there, on a Friday, waiting for me. The store manager was called back from her vacation because they were going to put me on final warning. Instead, I tossed my keys on the desk, threw my name tag at the district manager, and walked off. I shook the furniture manager's hand on the way out and haven't looked back since. It was brought to my attention a few months later by the other co-manager, who was fired, that the district manager was canned and the store manager was demoted and opted to move out of state, all due to that specific inventory. We're 9 years away from the anniversary of that day here soon. Thank God I got out of retail hell. Story 53. I used to work in analytics, and our director position had just got filled with someone from finance, but no analytics background. One day during a meeting with upper-level management, he had me prepare a deck. The numbers he had from one data source didn't match what our dashboard said, so he asked me to, quote, just make them match and fudge the numbers. I told him not to, but he forced it through and we presented it. During the meeting, a savvy C-level exec called out the number fudge, saying he knew that wasn't right, because it wasn't. He threw our team leader under the bus by saying one of us must not have checked. The next day, I was job hunting. I found another internal role, and at the HR exit interview, told them of the toxic environment. 3 other people followed me out the door, and he was put under review and eventually let go. On his way out, he tried to tank my review and reduce my bonus, but they saw that as retaliation and gave me more than I was supposed to. Yeah, don't you just love people that make a mistake and instead of owning up to it, they try to pull other people down with them and throw them under the bus? I think justice was definitely served here in the best possible way. Story 54. I write software. I was working at a company that if you're in portfolio management, you know who they are. The software was so bad. I single-handedly improved throughput and by about 10 million% and reduced memory by 98% across the entire product. It wasn't hard. I'm not that awesome. It's just that the code was that bad, and my colleagues were also that bad. My boss hated me for it. He didn't understand it. He tried and failed to take credit for it. I was untouchable. I no longer answered to him, even though I was under him. He decided to drive me nuts. One day, he started yelling at me about a bug. It had nothing to do with me, and the culprit even tried to get him to stop. He didn't. I was still getting yelled at for it. This has been months in the making. I had enough. I wiped my drive, wiped my desk into my bag, stopped by HR to tell them I was quitting, and that was it. The boss later framed our director for a blunder, got him out, all the talent left with him, and the company folded 8 months later. He was the only a-hole there who didn't see the writing on the wall and couldn't understand how the company collapsed. Last I heard, he's in complete denial since. Story 55. There's a few. I took his number after firing me for no real reason other than my kid was about to be born and they didn't want me to take their parental leave. I put his phone number up on Craigslist and grabbed pics of an older car and put it up for $500. I made around 20 posts. This was before he had to pay for car ads. An old coworker said his phone was unusable, and so he bought a new one, and I got his new number and did it again. A different boss was begging me to work there during an interview, and I did, despite the red flags. I was promised $20 an hour, a Monday to Friday schedule 8 to 4, and free lunches. I worked there for 2 weeks, and before I got my first paycheck, I noticed next week's schedule was midnight to 8 a.m. I get paid, and it was minimum wage with lunches deducted from paycheck. I was beyond furious. We had a computer that we all used to put daily logs on a shared document. I noticed our lovely boss used that computer first thing in the morning for her emails, Facebook, etc. I check the Chrome settings for saved passwords, and I see her passwords for her email and Facebook. I log in on her email on my phone and discover her using her email to talk crap about her boss to multiple people, like very personal attacks on his children, his wife, where he lives and drives, etc. I take all of those emails and forward them to her boss on a set date of 2 weeks from now and delete any evidence of the forward message being sent. I check her Facebook. She's married with 2 kids and find out she's cheating on her husband with 2 different men at the same time. She randomly leaves work, and I was able to match that up with the chat of her going to meet these people. I screenshot the chats and use her email to send them to her husband 2 days before the ones are sent to her boss. My God, that was one hell of a week. I didn't care I was making minimum wage. I waited. First email to her husband sent on a Monday, about 20 minutes after she gets to work. She's still sitting at the computer, and I stayed after I clocked out to chat, and it felt like I was in Death Note, constantly checking the time, waiting for the chaos to unfold. Then at the bottom right, it says email sent, but she doesn't notice. Within 5 minutes, her husband calls and is screaming at her, and she checks the sent box, and there's the email. She sent. She left work without saying anything to her boss. Came back late on Tuesday. I stay after again on Wednesday, still watching the time intently, and then, within minutes of the email being sent again, the boss asked to see her. She quit as soon as he asked about the emails she sent him. That was by far the most epic thing I've ever done for revenge so far. Story 56. Worked at a restaurant through college with awful management. One woman in particular, though, was horrible to me. Tara. She was a bully to me, but not anyone else. I received a dream job offer for a company before I graduated. I had to stick it out for 5 weeks and regretfully told everyone way too soon. The next 5 weeks, this woman would poke jokes at how I got this job. Sexual favors, accusing me of lying on my resume. It was super inappropriate. Turns out, my prospective job was also a dream job of hers, and she had applied countless times. I never reported her, and after 5 slow weeks, I left. Over a year later, I was walking out of a meeting, and Tara was in the hall with a couple of my fellow management. I had climbed the ladder quickly. Not sure why, but she said hi to me and said something about how I could vouch for her. I quickly realized she was there for an interview. I said, yeah, okay, and very calmly explained how I learned everything on how not to be a leader from working under Tara. How she was a toxic bully and manipulative, and should not be considered for this role or any future roles with X company. Smiled and walked away. From what I hear, she's still managing a restaurant. Haven't seen her since. Story 57. I worked in a furniture shop in the early 2000s. The manager was a right idiot. I mean a right idiot. Always effing with my half day I had on Fridays, setting up work for me to do that he knew would take me way past time I would normally leave by just before it was time for me to go, canceling holiday time I booked and moving them to a week later when I had plans for the week it was booked, stuff like that. I planned to leave but still needed the money, so I worked out how long I needed to work and save up to afford to be unemployed for a few months in case I had an issue with getting another job quickly. It turned out to be about 4 paychecks I needed to work for. When I got to only needing another 4 weeks worth of work, I started to buy my manager a cup of coffee every day without fail. Gave my 2 weeks notice when it was time, but kept buying coffee for him. On the final day, I loaded that coffee with as much laxatives as I could get away with, using the caramel taste to hide it. After hugging the bathroom for dear life in the afternoon, he went home sick and left it to the assistant manager to run the store. I like to think by the end of the day he was praying to God for it to stop. Story 58. I work in a Ford parts department. I used to work for a different Ford dealer. I started on the counter knowing nothing about parts and worked my way up to being a pretty decent parts guy. They trained me to return parts. Well, anyway, after about 2 years, they gave me a 30% raise. Really generous, right? In the meeting about my raise, the GM said, quote, "I want you and everyone else in that parts department to know you're replaceable." Once he said that, any loyalty to that company went out the window. Anyway, my boss quit, leaving the department understaffed. I was working extra just to keep up with my responsibilities. I was salary, so I didn't get any extra money for my time. So as I'm working extra hours, they have a shop meeting. Apparently in 2015/2016, some tech was intentionally botching a very popular recall. Like, he would take the parts and intentionally not do the recall and get paid. So we ended up owing Ford like $80K for not doing the recalls. Mind you, I wasn't even promoted to the counter until early 2017, so I had nothing to do with the situation. In the meeting, the bosses said some of that $80K would be coming out of our commission checks. Then, at the end of the meeting, the GM said, now wouldn't be the time to ask for a raise. I said F it and logged out of everything and quit that night with a text to everyone in parts, the service manager and the GM saying I quit. It's been almost 2 years and I've heard from some of my old coworkers there that they haven't replaced me and have like $100K in parts they don't want and can't return to Ford. I guess I wasn't so replaceable after all. F you, Fred, and F you, Adam. Story 59. Clinic I worked at for a while. I was there as locums, basically medical temp work. The official story I was given when I was brought in was that the doc I was covering for was on sabbatical and that they needed cover for 3 months. Good pay, so I'm in. Easy work, basic family medicine. Nothing I don't do every day. My second to last day, I get a phone call from management. Come in at 8 tomorrow. Why, I asked. We didn't open until 9. DEA is coming for an inspection, was the reply. Give them what they want. So I did exactly as requested. Turns out his sabbatical was mandated rehab for opioid addiction. That he'd been writing huge amounts of Percocet and oxycodone for family members and selling the meds, and that the DEA was pissed. They asked, and I gave what they wanted. Want the prescription logs? Sure, officer. Here you go. Nothing involving me. They asked me to give them a call if the owner asked me to prescribe him anything, as it was obvious he was selling the meds. I agreed to do so. By this point, I'd never even met the owner. End of the day, I get another call from the owner. Can you hang around a while? We'd like to discuss something. So I hang around. They make me a job offer. However, it's contingent on becoming the owner's primary physician and prescribing owner the medications he so sorely needs to function. Already signed and dated by the owner, just needs my signature. I laughed, turned them down, and took the contract with me. It said in writing the above that they wanted me to write everything. Walked out, called the nice DEA agent who asked me to call if needed, and faxed him the contract. That doc is now doing 10 years in prison for drug trafficking. Story 60. Worked for an absolute arsehole at a small travel company. Me and 3 others working for said arsehole. Guy was old school, but a proper micromanager who would pull you up over the slightest little thing. I got told off for stapling something, quote, the wrong way. I didn't even know there was a wrong way to staple something. And another guy got told off for spending too much time in the toilet. He was gone for less than 5 minutes, and still the guy had a moan at him. I'd only been there a couple weeks and hadn't yet been trained on sales, yet I was still expected to take all of the calls. One day, when everyone else was out, I took a call and ended up making a sale even though I hadn't had the proper training. 700 euros in the company pockets. When the guy got back, I told him, thinking he'd be impressed, but actually he was angry. How can you make a sale when I haven't shown you how to do it? Showed him the booking on the system. I had seen the guys do it enough times, so I knew what to do. And he said it was fine and I'd done everything correctly, but that's not the point, and you won't get any commission because you haven't been properly trained, and stormed out. Turned to the other guys and was like, what the F? And they were like, yeah, he just likes things done his way. I waited for him to come back a bit later on, then said in front of everyone, you won't have to worry about training me on sales. I quit. I'd rather go and make money for someone who'll appreciate it. Told him to write me a check for the hours I'd work plus the commission. He emailed me the next week and again tried to say I wasn't entitled to it, so I replied fine, but there's nothing in the contract that I signed that says commission is dependent on having completed any training. So if you don't pay me the full amount that I'm owed, then I'll take you to tribunal. Copied in all the other employees. Check for the full amount arrived a few days later. Story 61. I was a security guard for an industrial plant that was being built and was trying to report the project's supervisor for verbal harassment. Not the first report he'd gotten about her. She was a huge problem. After the regional manager, who I was reporting to, told me that me and everyone who reported to her has no idea what it's like being a supervisor, and that it's not a responsibility we could handle for an hour, let alone as our job, I told him, you know what? You're going to have to find someone else to come in on Sunday. I'm done. He hesitated and said, really? Are you sure? You know you... And I cut him off with, yep, no one needs this. You need to get your crap together and fix this problem, or it's going to be your fault you lose that contract. And hung up before he could reply. Promptly logged into my phone carrier's app and changed my phone number. I knew they had a previous mailing address on file for me, and now they didn't have my phone number. Kept my uniform and all the expensive equipment provided to each employee that was expected to be returned. The only thing I actually returned was my access badge to the plant's security office to my shift supervisor, who was under the project supervisor, who I knew would make sure my badge would get properly deactivated, and she said she was leaving next week now that I was gone. So they lost equipment, and the only two employees that followed required procedures and made sure daily reports were filled out properly. That was 6 years ago. Now I work for a different company testing pipe welds for industrial plants. In November of last year, I had to go do some tests at that plant, and there was a new security company. I asked the guy preparing a temporary access badge, how long has this company worked security here? It used to be the company I worked for, and it was less than 3 months after I quit 6 years ago. I'm not saying I was a critical part of that operation, but I certainly knew how much me and my supervisor did to keep things from unraveling because of the incompetency of the project supervisor. If they'd just let her go and promoted literally anyone else, it would have worked out, even after me and my supervisor quit. Bonus wisdom. I was really frustrated and upset after I quit and changed my phone number. I put a lot of effort into that job, and I felt like I was being dismissed like a brat making unreasonable demands. I expressed being upset to my now ex-supervisor when I turned in my access badge, and she said, quote, "People usually don't quit their jobs, they quit their bosses," and that made me feel so much better. Story 62. My lead programmer took me into a room. He said that although he didn't agree, he'd been told to tell me that I wasn't putting enough effort in, and if I didn't fix a bug I was working on by the next day, that I would be fired. We talked a bit more, and he said they weren't his words, and he thought I was one of the best programmers and hardest workers on the team. I went back to my desk and stared at the screen for a while. Then I thought, F it, drafted and printed out a notice letter and went and handed it to HR. The next day, it wasn't my lead programmer, but a producer who took me to a room. He asked if I would be willing to stay for another 6 months. I asked him, which is it? Do they want me to stay or do they want to fire me? Then I asked why the MD, the guy in charge, kept sending other people to do his dirty work. I then refused to stay with the company for the 6 months. Spent my month's notice basically doing nothing while the company collapsed under a terrible leadership of the MD. Story 63. For years, I ran around like a chicken with its head cut off, putting out figurative fires at a hotel. This problem happened, I'd handle it. That problem happened, I'd handle it. The whole time, I kept telling the owner, hey, if you just invest some money into the hotel to fix this and this, then these problems would go away. He essentially told me that he doesn't need to because that's why I'm here. Despite just admitting that I'm the one that barely holds the strings together, he paid me absolute dog crap. I told him I wanted a significant raise for everything I do. He basically laughed and said no. I told him that without me here, this hotel wouldn't last 5 years with all the problems it has, and he told me that there was no way I was leaving. So that day I found another job, which was pretty easy when you only had to get more than minimum wage, and that day I just didn't come into the hotel. The boss called and demanded I get down there at once or I was fired, and I said, yeah, I'm not gonna do that. I found another job that pays more. Took me 2 hours from the time you told me I would never leave. That hotel was shut down by the city in less than 1 year, and today they've torn down the building. Story 64. I was a tower climber, on my second tower of the day, finishing up some stuff on top. My foreman had quit about 3 months prior, and the construction coordinator, instead of hiring a new foreman, he just kept me at my same pay and loaded up my job duties, and I was working like 80 hours a week. There are 3 guys on the ground because they're terribly slow, and I'm trying to wrap up a job, and I've just trimmed 30 cables, about to put connectors on, and fire everything up when my phone rings. It's my construction coordinator who sent me to do all the stuff on this tower because he didn't trust the other clowns, or thought they'd take too long. He says, quote, hey man, I need you to come down and go climb a water tower and do a site survey for new construction. Take some pictures and measurements on top. I say, can you make one of the ground guys here go? I'm able to finish this job today. He says, no, I don't trust them to do a good job and I need you to go now. I completely lost it, quite prepared to lose my job. Shouted at him over the phone about how exhausted I've been picking up his slack for the old foreman and no pay raise. I also called him a mother effer and even made a comment on his small chicken size. Tossed my work truck keys from the top of the tower and told them to tow the truck home because my wife is coming to get me. I put up my tools and headed on down the tower. When I was about 40 feet from the bottom, his boss calls me and says I've been promoted to construction coordinator and got a $30,000 raise. I guess he went and complained about what I said said or how I quit, and his boss fired him for it. It was the most astonishing thing I've ever been part of. Story 65. You need to read this. Best Buy loss prevention lead. Because I refused to lie about a friend and fellow employee who was accused of stealing TVs and GPS units. I wasn't even working when this supposedly happened. I was told that they wanted me to sign a statement saying I witnessed him removing the items from the store. He probably did steal the items, however, I never witnessed him taking them. Told John and Rebecca, managers, no, I'm not going to lie about something that I have no knowledge of occurring. Then I was told how important it was that I sign the statement and explained to the police exactly the same thing in the statement. I told them that I wanted to take some time to think about it and that I was going to lunch. I called the employee and told him not to come back to work and explained everything to him. Ate me some Chipotle and went back to find 6 Houston police officers in the store. I was then told that if I didn't sign the statement, I was going to be fired and arrested for the missing items that totaled $4,688. I pulled the statement over and picked up the pen, looked at John and smiled. I finished signing the statement and slid it back to John. It read, "F you, cocksmoker. I quit." I was then stood up and forced to remove my Best Buy yellow shirt and name tag and then walked out of the office by 6 officers as they held my arms. With all the employees and customers watching, I stopped walking and said, "Read them to me right here." The officer began to read me my Miranda rights. I stood there looking at my fellow employees, whom I've known for over 3 years, because I would lie for them. I said as they walked me out the doors. I spent 2 days locked up, without a phone call or lawyer, and suddenly I was released. Now, I don't know what exactly happened, but I was told by the officer that was processing me for the release that there is not sufficient evidence for me to be charged. I did find out after I was taken away, the customers and employees walked out. The next night, I was still locked up. At 2-ish in the morning, an electric fire destroyed the store. Total loss, including the store inventory, that showed the missing items. I have to say, I didn't have anything to do with the fire. But dude, the reputation I got after that was so beyond epic. I became the guy not to F with overnight. Mind you, I have no idea if any of this happened until 4 days after the fire. I did run it to John at HEB a few months later. I don't know how the F you did it, but I'm gonna figure it out, and when I do, I'll be coming for you, he said. And I replied, better check that Magic 8 Ball again. I sent one of these to corporate and have one ready to hit the news desk at Local 2. I handed him a 4GB flash drive with one 22-minute audio file on it, where he was threatening to have me arrested for a crime I had nothing to do with unless I falsify company forms to have another employee fired and arrested. The look on his face was worth 2 days locked up. I looked at him and said, "Oh, John, word of advice, be careful when you play with fire. You don't want to get burnt." Update. John no longer works for Best Buy, and from what I've been told, he can't get a job in upper management in retail. Rebecca was transferred and working for a store in the middle of nowhere in Oklahoma. My friend didn't take the TVs, but it was later discovered that it was a local group of guys boxing old TVs and new TV boxes and returning them unopened, and they had hit us 3 times. Me, well, I ain't a effing snitch, and life is great. Story 66. Over 10 years ago now, I called about 12 hours early to call off for my overnight shift at a convenience store/gas station. If you're from New Jersey, you know. Because my family got the call, my grandmother wasn't recovering well from surgery and we needed to say goodbye. My boss was a stickler for scheduling and I knew it wasn't going to go well, but I wasn't going to not be there with her. "I'm not accepting your call out. I need you as shift leader tonight. I can't come in. There's an emergency. It's 10 a.m. and I don't start till 11 p.m. You should have given me more notice than that. I called you as soon as I found out. There's absolutely no way I can be there. What's such an emergency that you can't make your assigned shift? We just got a call that my grandmother is about to die." "Yeah, well, your grandmother isn't bullcrap or drama I have to deal with. You still have to come in." I had been sobbing but stopped. 5 seconds passed for me to fully absorb what he said, but I didn't hesitate in my answer. "Rob, you are not bullcrap or drama I have to deal with. I quit." 2 months later, I was in Atlantic City for my cousin's bachelorette party, and we were gambling a little. Turns out the guy that went all in on a hand I won was Rob. When he picked up his head and saw it was me, I waved and blew a kiss with my middle finger. Best part, Graham made it. She'll be 98 in August. Okay, well, first of all, glad to hear that Graham pulled through, but second of all, like, what kind of despicable human being has the nerve to say that to someone about a family member that's potentially on their deathbed? You're absolutely sick, and you deserve to lose your life savings. Story 67. I was 18, 2008, and worked for a supermarket. For a couple of months, management has been pushing us to our limit to get more work done much faster. We've been very unhappy, so there comes this one Saturday. When I arrived in the late afternoon, things were an absolute mess, especially in the storage and loading area. My shift leader had his last night, and things were so messy that he decided to call it a day for himself. I took charge. We wrapped things up as well as we could, and we finished way too late, of course. As we drank beer in the cantina after work, everyone was really pissed, so I decided to leave a message to management. It was something like, "We're absolutely fed up with the way things are. They have to change." I read it out loud to my colleagues, and they spontaneously decided to sign the letter as well, so I ended up with about 12 signatures. Management wasn't too happy. When I arrived on Monday after school for my shift, my colleagues were thrilled to see me. Then I heard a very angry voice through the PA system asking me to come to the manager's office. When I came in, my manager was there together with one of my best friends, who was a shift leader as well. She intentionally put him there and let him berate me, although it was clear he didn't want to. It was an absolute crap storm, but I was able to continue to work there. That night, we were almost done. The shift leader sent everybody home, except for me. Then he told me to spiegel. I don't know the English term, but it means to present the front of all the product toward the aisles. The entire soda aisle by myself. I got mad because of ordinary bullying, told him to shove it and quit on the spot. Story 68. Always had an issue with my boss in my previous job. The moment I knew she'd be trouble is when I first literally met her. Goes to me and asks for my number. I assume it's because of work-related things. Immediately giggles and goes off. "I'm not asking you on a date or anything." I stop. Look her straight in the eyes and respond with, "Yeah, it's work-related. I'm not interested in that type of stuff." Her reaction was priceless, won't lie. Looked like I heard her ego and she took off stomping. And the things that happened between 5 months after, she clearly had a favorite in the group of 6 people that we had. Every time the favorite would make a mistake. "Oh, he's just tired." Keep in mind that all he did was stay in the office doing paperwork and ordering parts, while the others had to move machines, weld, cut, you name it, and would get in trouble for being even late on fixing something. And I'm talking, she would belittle you. Needless to say, I quit. She began to treat me like a child, scolding me, and when she said, "Don't you need money to keep paying for your new car?" I said, "Yeah, I do, but clearly not from here." Just turned, packed all my things, and left. Now, here's the real kicker. Got a call from a buddy still working there and told me management forced her to do my job till they could find someone else to fill my spot. Ended up doing my job for about 3 weeks. Story 69. I had a supervisor, the senior mainframe programmer, I was PC network admin, who was low-level, harassing several women in the office for years. Real creepy behavior, but not enough to get fired. They'd complained about him before I started, but were ignored because of a lack of evidence. I discovered some of his creepiness was more than just low-level. He was randomly ending women's jobs on the mainframe, which would freeze their terminal, dumb AS/400 terminals, forcing them to call him over for help. I told one woman to call me instead, and he once threw a fit, demanding to know what I was doing talking to her. I asked why it mattered, and he said, quote, "Because I hate that woman so much." Bizarre. Corporate had also given him admin access to the email server. He immediately started reading all their emails, even sharing them with another woman with whom he was having an affair. She didn't like 2 of the other women, so she started casually slipping tidbits from their personal emails into office chatter. One juicy bit involved an affair that one of the other women was having, so she wasn't going to complain about it. I got fed up and just walked out one day. I wasn't going to say anything. In those days, late 90s, you get blackballed for ratting on the boys' club. Plus, none of the women would make a complaint since the one feared her affair being revealed to everyone. But the corporate HR director called me the next day asking if I thought I'd made a mistake. I told him the whole story. Years later, I ran into 2 of the women he had been harassing, and they told me that he hadn't been fired because he was under contract and they needed him, but he had been absolutely forbidden to speak with any women at the location. He spent the next 3 years walking from his car straight to his office, avoiding all eye contact, and rarely poking his head out until it was quitting time. The moment his contract was up, he bailed.